Peppa Pig. Red sky. One morning, Peppa woke up without knowing what had disturbed her. The alarm hadn't rung, no one had called her, but something felt wrong. She sat up in bed. Her room was flooded with light, but it wasn't warm or golden. It was dark red, heavy, like the glow of a lamp hidden behind thick fabric, as if the entire world beyond the window had changed. Peppa walked toward the curtain, reached out, but stopped. On the floor just in front of the window lay a crumpled note, its corners bent, the paper creased as if someone had thrown it long ago and it had been waiting ever since, scrawled in uneven handwriting, "Don't look out the window," written hastily, the letters trembling. Peppa turned around. Everything in the room was as usual, same toys, same bedspread, but it all seemed just a little darker, as if the world had been shifted half a step to the side. She stepped into the hallway. The walls looked grayish. The air smelled like dust. Downstairs, Mummy and Daddy were sitting at the table, silent. Daddy held a newspaper but wasn't reading. Mummy stared into her cup as if looking down a deep well. "Good morning," Peppa said. No answer. "What's wrong with the sky? Why is everything so red?" Mummy lifted her head, slowly. Her smile was almost normal, but her eyes didn't move, as if she had forgotten how. "And where's George?" Still silence. A slight creak from Daddy's chair. He didn't move. Peppa ran upstairs. George's bed was perfectly made, pillow smoothed, blanket tucked. On the sheet, another note. He looked. Just 2 words. But she understood. The bedroom window was sealed from the inside, dark grey tape, crisscrossed. Behind the glass, the red light pressed in. Thick and still, like a fog inside a windowless room. It didn't flicker, it didn't move. It just existed, and it felt alive. Peppa peeked into the hallway again. The red light had grown stronger, but gave off no warmth. It didn't illuminate, it swallowed whatever it touched. She went back to the kitchen. Her parents were frozen. Mummy's spoon trembled at the edge of her cup, but her hand was locked in place. "Why aren't you talking?" Peppa asked. No reply. On the far wall, a crack appeared, barely visible at first, then slowly growing, as if something behind the wall was scratching from the inside, deliberate, steady. A faint hiss spread across the floorboards. That evening, the house fell deeper into silence. Even the clocks had stopped. Mummy didn't blink. Daddy didn't breathe, yet his chest continued to rise and fall, like someone pretending to be alive. Peppa sat in her room. On the floor, a new note. "Don't open your eyes." She squeezed them shut, tight, but still, she could see the red glow through her eyelids. Footsteps, soft hooves, moving slowly through the hallway. Carefully, they stopped at her door. "Peppa," whispered a voice, childlike, a little like George's, but hollow inside. "You want to look, don't you?" She kept her eyes closed. The next morning never came. The light remained the same. Red, constant. No Mummy, no Daddy, no George. The house was empty. Only the faint rustling in the corners and the echo of her own footsteps remained. On the kitchen table sat one final note. "Now you're alone. Don't look up. Ever." She lasted 1 day, then another. Then she lost track. One day, Peppa stood up, walked to the window, slowly peeled off the tape, strip by strip. Behind the glass, not a street, not the sky, something red, vast, shapeless, and within it, an eye, enormous, alive, unlike anything she'd ever seen. It stared straight at her, and Peppa couldn't look away. The eye was too close, too bright, too correct. She's no longer visible in the house, but if you stand quietly in front of the window long enough, you might catch a reflection, small, childlike, with eyes wide open, eyes that never blink again. Peppa Pig, the friend. One afternoon, Peppa was playing in her room. She found an old photo album in a drawer and began flipping through it. On one page, she saw a picture of herself as a little piglet, in a sandbox, standing next to someone. A small animal in a blue dress with a long tail and soft white fur. Dark eyes, a slight smile. She wasn't posing, just standing there like she had always been part of the scene. The name came to Peppa instantly. Lucy. "Lucy," she whispered. My friend. Peppa ran to the kitchen. "Mummy, do you remember Lucy the Weasel? We used to play all the time." Mummy paused. She looked at the photo, smiled, but not like she meant it. "Peppa, you never had a weasel friend named Lucy." "But she's right here." Peppa pointed at the photo. Mummy took it, stared for too long, then quietly put it away in the top drawer. All day, things felt off. Something was different. The carpet wasn't in the same place. The windows looked smaller, and in her toy box, a doll she didn't remember owning, gray, in a faded blue dress, with a little tail. The next morning, Peppa woke up to a faint rustling. By the window sat a piece of paper, a drawing, childlike and simple. Peppa and Lucy on swings beneath a tree. Written beneath it, "You remember me." Peppa showed the photo to Daddy. He squinted. "There's only you in this picture," he said. "Maybe it's just a shadow, a trick of the light." But after Peppa left, he stared at it for a long time and slipped it into his pocket. On the third day, she found another photo, a picnic near a pond, Peppa, George, and Lucy. The back was labeled Peppa, George, and Lucy. May, the name Lucy, had been carefully crossed out. That night, Peppa woke up with the feeling that she wasn't alone. By the wardrobe stood a shape, thin, still, white fur, long tail, a faded blue dress. The figure didn't move, it just watched. Peppa pulled the blanket over her head. In the morning, the same doll was in the corner, the one with the blue dress. On its hem, written in shaky handwriting, "I'm back." On the fourth day, the photo album vanished. Daddy said it never existed. Mummy smiled and told her not to worry, but Peppa remembered, and now, more and more often, she began to see Lucy in reflections, sometimes in the window, sometimes in the mirror, sometimes standing just behind her. On the fifth night, there was a drawing in her bed, only Lucy this time, standing in an empty room, a door behind her. On the door was written, "Don't forget." The sixth day passed in silence. Daddy flipped through a newspaper with blank pages. Mummy stared at the wall. When Peppa spoke, they responded too slowly, as if her voice had to travel a long distance to reach them. That night she heard the voice again, software familiar. "Peppa, you were my friend. You left. I stayed." The room grew colder. The doll was on the windowsill now. Peppa threw it, but by morning it was back. Seventh day. A door appeared against the wall, narrow, wooden, blue. Daddy said, "That's just the closet. It's always been there." But Peppa knew there had never been a door there before. She stepped closer, placed her hoof on the handle. Beyond the door, darkness, footsteps. A familiar voice whispered, "Come in. It's fun again. You just forgot." Peppa stepped through, and the door shut behind her. Since then, the house has been quiet. There are fewer faces in the photos, the album, blank pages, but one frame in the living room now holds a new picture. Lucy the Weasel standing by the swings, alone, and behind her, a faint shadow. It has no face, only a silhouette, but if you look closely, the shadow's hooves are visible. Peppa Pig, the box. It happened on a grey day. Rain drizzled over the garden and the grass glistened with drops. Peppa and George were playing near a tree when they saw it. A box, old, dusty, unmarked. It stood directly on the ground as if it had just appeared. "Look, George!" Peppa exclaimed. "What's that?" They approached it carefully. The box was light, almost empty. Peppa picked it up and something inside rustled faintly. They brought it home and placed it in the corner of the room next to their toys. When Mummy saw the box, she frowned. "Where did you find that?" "It came by itself," Peppa answered. Mummy looked at the box for another moment, then turned away without saying anything. The next morning the box had changed. Inside was a small toy car, red, shiny, brand new, like it had just come from a store. George picked it up and quickly pulled his hoof away. The car was ice cold, as if it had been buried in snow. They decided to keep it, just a toy, probably. On the second day there was a doll inside the box, tiny, wearing a grey dress. Its bead-like eyes pointed in different directions. When Peppa picked it up, the doll shivered slightly, as if something had sighed inside it. Peppa quickly placed it on the shelf. The doll stood there, motionless, but at night, Peppa could swear its head had turned ever so slightly toward her. On the third night, Peppa heard a rustling sound. She woke up and saw that the box was open. A sheet of paper was sticking out. She got up and walked closer. On the paper was a photograph, their house, but the windows were black voids, and three faceless figures stood by the door, just shadows. On the fourth day, one of Peppa's drawings disappeared from the wall. Then George's dinosaur toy was gone. They searched everywhere. There was no trace, and George whispered, "The box took it." The house began to change. Lights flickered. Mirrors grew cloudy. Shadows lingered in the hallways where there had been none during the day. Peppa tried to tell Daddy. He laughed. "What box, Peppa? We don't have a box." But there was fear in his eyes. On the fifth night, the box was standing right next to Peppa's bed. Inside was a doorknob, exactly like the one on their front door, only dirty and cold. Peppa ran to the hallway. The door was really broken. It could no longer be closed, and beyond the threshold stood the night, and the wind carried with it the sound of soft dragging footsteps. The sixth day, Peppa looked into the box. Inside was a drawing, one she hadn't made. It showed her, but the arms were too long, the head tilted at a strange angle, and the eyes, they stared directly at her. Underneath the drawing, scratched into the paper, were the words, "You're almost ready." That night, Peppa did not sleep. She sat and stared at the box. From inside, there came a light tapping, as if fingers were drumming against the inside walls. Then a rustle, then breathing. She shut her eyes tight. On the seventh night, the box was empty. Only at the very bottom, in the dust, scratched faintly, were the words, "Now you are part of me." Peppa looked around. The house was different, the hallways long and empty, the windows black and dead, and in the mirrors instead of her reflection stood the box, closer, each time even closer. And in the silence Peppa heard, "Just a little more, and you'll forget who you were."
Peppa Pig, the others. The evening sky was pale grey. The air was completely still. The pig family was having dinner in silence. The clinking of cutlery, the slow footsteps, the dripping of the tap. Everything sounded louder than usual. After dinner, Mummy Pig washed the dishes. Daddy Pig sat in his chair with the newspaper. George played with his dinosaur near the sofa. Peppa was putting together a puzzle on the floor. The evening felt like it was lasting slightly longer than it should. There was a knock at the door. Once, then again, no doorbell, no voices. Daddy Pig opened it. Standing on the doorstep were them, exact copies of the family, one to one. Mummy, Daddy, Peppa, George, same clothes, same faces, same posture. Something was wrong. Their poses were too still, their expressions too flat. Eyes just slightly too dark, smiles frozen. They didn't speak. They simply stepped inside. No one stopped them. They spread out through the house. The second mummy stood at the sink. The second Daddy beside the chair. The second Peppa sat opposite the real one, moving a puzzle piece slowly back and forth, never placing it. The second George just stood there, glassy-eyed. At first, the real family just watched, as if it were all a mistake. But the copies didn't leave. They stayed, and acted as though they had always lived here. The next morning, it all happened again. 2 families under one roof. One breakfast, mirrored movements. But the copies were off, just slightly wrong, always half a second behind, as if mimicking learning. The second daddy sat in the chair but never turned a page. The second mummy washed already clean dishes. The second George held the dinosaur upside down and never blinked. The second Peppa stared directly at the real Peppa, unmoving, without emotion. Real Peppa tried to interact, but the other Peppa didn't speak. She only mirrored her like a reflection, a delayed, hollow one. By the 3rd day, the real family began to fade, literally. Their colors dulled, their movements slowed, their voices grew quiet. The mirrors showed only the new family. On the 4th day, the real George was gone. No one looked for him. The second George remained, walking silently through the house, smiling emptily. Peppa realized no one noticed them disappearing. Real Daddy and Mummy were pale, tired, fading like old photographs. The copies now moved with more energy, more clarity. They no longer imitated. They simply existed. On the 5th day, the real Mummy vanished. Only Peppa remained. Still bright, still real. She tried to leave. The front door was there, but nothing was behind it. Only solid white light, no road, no sky, no sound. The other Peppa now slept in her bed, wore her clothes, held her toys. The dinosaur rested in the hands of the new George. One night, real Peppa woke to find the other Peppa watching her, from beneath the bed, still, unblinking. After that, there was silence. The new family lived in the house. They laughed, cooked, played. They looked normal, as if they had always been there. But in the cupboard beneath the stairs, behind old boxes and bags, if you look closely, you might see a pale pink shape, sitting quietly, knees to chest. No face, no eyes, no name. It doesn't move anymore. Peppa Pig, lost episode, the new one. One morning, Peppa woke up, and there was someone else in the room. He was sitting on the bed beside George, about their age. His skin was pale, almost gray. He didn't move or speak, but when Peppa stood up, he looked at her and smiled, as if he had been waiting. Everything else was ordinary: the bright morning light, the familiar bedroom, the smell of breakfast. Except this new child, unknown, uninvited, behaved as though he had always lived there. In the kitchen, 3 bowls were already set on the table. Mummy Pig served breakfast without a hint of confusion. Daddy Pig flipped through his newspaper. George laughed and ate his porridge. Everyone carried on as if nothing had changed. The new child ate with them. Throughout the day, Peppa watched. He helped set the table. He played with George. He sat with Daddy Pig. He drew pictures. His name was Ralphie. Everyone said it so casually, so naturally, as if he had always been part of the family. But Peppa didn't remember him. Not from yesterday, not from last week, not from ever. She checked the family photo albums. Ralphie was in all of them, standing beside George, holding hands, sitting on Daddy Pig's lap. Where Peppa used to be, now he was, as if she had been carefully cut out and replaced. On the 2nd day, the bedroom changed. Peppa's bed was pushed into the corner. Her things began to vanish: clothes, toys, even her books. In their place were new objects, gray, unfamiliar, lifeless, no scent, no name, no memory. The family talked to each other, smiled, lived their lives, but none of them looked at Peppa. Sometimes their gaze passed near her, but never directly. She tried to make herself known, with movement, with noise, with presence, but was met only with silence, or worse, polite indifference. Only Ralphie looked directly at her, for long moments, without blinking. He never blinked, and his smile, always the same, whether he was eating, playing, or simply sitting still. He knew. By the 3rd day, her name was never spoken. No one called her for meals. No one asked where she was. George laughed only with Ralphie. Mummy Pig stroked his head when he passed. Daddy Pig read bedtime stories to 2 children. On the 4th morning, Peppa's bed was gone. The room now had only 2 beds, George's and Ralphie's. Her belongings had disappeared completely. There were no traces. The only photo on the wall showed 4 figures: Ralphie, George, Mummy Pig, and Daddy Pig. The caption beneath it read, "Our family." The mirror reflected the empty room. Ralphie and George played on the floor. Peppa stood in the doorway, but her reflection wasn't there. The house looked the same, but inside it, another story had begun. One where Peppa had never existed. That night, she simply faded. No sound, no trace, no goodbye. The next morning, someone carefully closed her old sketchbook. On the last page was a drawing. 2 children, a mother and a father. 4 simple shapes. No names, no Peppa.